So in this segment, we're going to be discussing Labour's kind of disastrous poll ratings at the moment. People try and argue, it doesn't really matter too much because, the election is not going to be for another 4 years. But I think you'll have some Labour MPs who are a bit nervous about how badly Labour are doing in certain areas. And I think the poll rating kind of reflects that.
Well, I think you've seen those articles that Nick talked about. Like, there is a big case to be made that the UK has hamstrung itself from an investment perspective, and that actually changing the fiscal rules will give greater confidence because it will show that the Labour Party are serious about growth.
Okay.
That's one of the things that they have actually done, because I think they received a lot of pushback because they've stopped talking about this kind of painful budget that's coming, because I think investors and a lot of people just said, like, why would I invest in a country that's going to be looking at budget cuts and austerity and things like that? And so for anyone who thinks they can take a victory lap over this, I will be watching, because if you admit the fact that there was a massive amount of public pushback, you are being incredibly disingenuous.
You have some broader polling out today as well on voter intentions. Let's have a look. Again, Marie Tidwell, it's one poll. I know the only poll that matters is the general election, either the one 3 months ago or the one in 5 years, but let's have a look.
So this is our standard voting intention poll that we ask once every couple of weeks or so. And what we have found is that Labour's lead over the Conservatives has dropped to just 1 point. Labour are down.
So this is scary. This scares me more. This terrifies me. Reform being on 19 is terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying.
Down from their general election result, they're now on 29%. The Conservatives up on 28%, and Reform UK also up on 19%. So gains for the Conservatives, gains for Reform, and the Labour Party down.
Because there is a section of people within the Labour Party who would move to Reform. That's one of the big problems that you have with populists. It's not just, you don't just have to worry about Conservatives. You have to worry more really about these populists, because they'll attack you from both sides. And that's one of the big problems they'll face. There's more here from Sam Coates kind of discussing similar numbers about Starmer's favourability.
And here it is. These are Keir Starmer's approval ratings. The darker line is those favourability ratings, and the lighter line is unfavourability. And here we have the election, all the way over here. And look what happened. He briefly, immediately after the election, became popular. And now look what's happened. In the space of a short period of time, he is pretty much one of the most unpopular politicians in the country. He's more unpopular than Nigel Farage. Now, ultimately, I saw this kind of churn on, for instance, Boris Johnson's numbers. He went up and down, and politicians can turn it around. But we have stood in this studio and talked about how on election day, just before he won a landslide victory, over half the public had an unfavourable view of him. He has a tough act to turn public perceptions around. And look at that. Things are going very quickly in the wrong direction.
I agree with this. I think he has got a lot to do. I think just focusing on policies that will benefit people will be the most important thing. Getting rid of the toxic culture within Downing Street will be another important thing. And fixing your damn comms team. Fix the comms team, honestly. And, if you want to see the poll rating, these are different numbers to what Coates has, because I think he's probably running off. No, he's got the YouGov numbers. But when we look at it, you got the disapproval of the new government. So these are complete different statistics I'm looking at. So you can see how much the public disapproved of the old government. So that's 71%. Disapproval very high. You look at the disapproval of the new government, it's at about 59, which is also very high. So ultimately, they're not doing that great. You can say they're doing better than the Tories, but again, my bar for the Labour Party will always be much higher than, it seems like the public's is. This is an unfortunate freeze frame of Nick Watt, but this is what, he talks about more of the despair within the Labour Party.
You should hear what ministers have been saying about the Downing Street operation.
Yeah.
They are literally holding their saying, how has this happened? I spoke to one veteran. The language is not repeatable on a family programme, but...
Well, it's not a family programme, it's for adults, and we are nearly 11 o'clock at night, Nick.
I've got four months swearing.
Was it the B? I know you have. It was way before my...
I haven't followed the rules to do it.
OK. Is it the B word or the F word or worse?
The everything word.
OK.
Jesus Christ.
They are just... I was talking to one veteran saying they're just in despair that Keir Starmer just doesn't have a political touch, and the thing that worries them is he doesn't seem to know that he doesn't have a political touch.
Right. He's a guy, I think he's very reliant on his advisors, very reliant on other people, and that's one of his key problems. He doesn't seem to have this kind of hard set ideology, this kind of belief. What does he want? He keeps talking about, my Labour Party, Keir's Britain, all of this kind of stuff, right? What does he fundamentally believe in? What's his vision beyond growth? and things like that, because the Tories talk about growth all the time. What do you want for this country? And that's the thing I don't think he can answer.
Talking to people who know him really well, saying, I don't want to go and work there. It's not a great atmosphere.
It's an omni shambles, let's be honest. This is Ed Balls talking about some of this stuff as well.
Your opinion as someone who has been in government, is what they're experiencing
So he was there under Tony Blair.
highly unusual, or is it par for the course at this stage?
I think governments who haven't been, or people who've not been in power for 14 years, sometimes take a bit of time to kind of get themselves properly geared up. When you're in there, it's much more complex and harder than you realise. However,
I don't think David Cameron had that problem, as much as I hate the geezer. I don't remember. I was obviously a lot younger back then, but I don't remember these kind of stories coming out about Cameron, these kind of issues and things like that, being so chaotic within the first 100 days. And that was a coalition government.
this is not...
Was it the same under Tony Blair as well? Did he have these kind of problems like within the first 100 days of government?
Not usual. This is much more chaotic. In the end, with government, you're either on top of things, leading, driving the agenda, or you're on the defensive and on the back foot. And they've been on the back foot too much in the last 2 or 3 months.
Because they've let the kind of news cycle, the problem they have is the same problem Boris Johnson has, which is he'll, do something stupid or something bad will happen and he'll take forever to deal with it. And he'll let ministers defend the bad position, and eventually he'll realise, it's too toxic. I need to do something. The only exception really being the winter fuel allowance. Everything else, when it comes to the bribes, etc., he was incredibly stupid. Ministers went out to defend him, and then ultimately he started. He said, we're not going to accept any more clothing donations, and we're not going to accept certain types of gifts. He paid back the money for the Taylor Swift tickets and things like that. And you're like, why not just do that in the first place? His instincts are absolutely awful.
And look, I've known Lord Ali for a long time. I don't know him well. I don't think he's badly motivated. I don't think he's in this for the money or for influence or power. He was just trying to be...
Yeah, he wants the money, power, respect. That's what I think he wants. He always backed centrist candidates, and here we have another centrist candidate for him to back, because that's where he is ideologically.
Helpful, but fundamentally on this whole thing about expenses and process of government, surely they would have come in after the mess of the last few years with a very clear view. We're changing the ministerial code. Here's how we're going to do things properly, not just sticking with the rules, but knowing that they're the right rules. And
that is also true. Just because it's right doesn't mean it's moral. That's one of the other problems that I have with with this kind of idea as well. Labour came in with the perception of, Boris Johnson went wrong because he didn't declare the gifts. It's like, no, Boris Johnson went wrong by taking them. Just like you have, evidently. Just because you declare it does not make it morally correct. Because the whole point is they're buying you stuff to buy influence with you. Why do you think rich people pay politicians so much money? It's to buy favour, so that when they need a favour, they'll get it back.
And it seems as though they didn't do that thinking and that work, and that is why they are kind of so mired in these problems. And I'm not sure that simply changing Sue Gray is going to be enough. They've got to...
I think they fumbled the Sue Gray thing. I think the person who replaced her is going to do probably a much worse job, to be honest.
Get professional and on top of leading the country quickly, and they've not...
What they need is big policies. They should have got the budget out. If they got the budget out, they would have been all right, I think, but they didn't. Because that way there would be much more to talk about, and there would have been a lot to digest, depending on the scale of what was to come out with the budget. This is where they misplayed, because they haven't done a lot, and everything we've seen from them is incredibly negative. The bribes, the Sue Gray situation, the winter fuel allowance, they haven't set the agenda. They didn't set the pace, effectively. And what's happened is they're being dragged along in these news cycles.
Not done that yet, and so compared to 2010, compared to 1997, compared to 1979, new government after over a decade, this is much more chaotic and poor than usual.
So essentially, what he's making the point that this is much more chaotic than Cameron and Tony Blair, and also I think that's Thatcher thrown in there as well. So these are big problems for Labour to deal with, and I'm not sure if they're going to be able to deal with them effectively, because the man in charge fundamentally is not a politician. He doesn't have the understanding of how to deal with problems within the party, problems within his kind of direct team, and problems within the country. He's not a leader. That's the main problem. He managed to squeak by an election. I think that was more Sunak's loss than Starmer's win any day of the week. Really, it was Liz Truss that cost them, I think. But what we're seeing is a guy who's just not. He's not it. That's the problem. He's not a Sir Alex Ferguson. He doesn't have it. And so I think this is what's going to cause a lot of problems over kind of this term until Starmer's gone, really. But anyways, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.